So as Jeff mentioned, the Belt Road Initiative and the Free and Open Indo-Pacific concept or vision or strategy really are key frameworks for how this region is evolving. And the United States and Japan and other countries are sharing a free and open Indo-Pacific vision, although they're slightly different. And I'm going to focus much more on the Japan side today because I think it's a more nuanced view about the free and open Indo-Pacific. And I'm also going to talk about the Chinese Belt Road Initiative and what does it mean for regionalization. So when we're thinking about this discussion, again, why are we thinking about the Indo-Pacific? And this is a question, I think, for many countries, whether it's Australia, whether it's the United States, whether it's Canada, or whether it's European countries. Why are we focusing on the Indo-Pacific? And I think that's really critical if we're trying to couch or think about our national interests and our national strategy to engage in this region. Then I'm going to introduce the free and open Indo-Pacific vision, and I'm going to contrast that with the Belt Road Initiative. And I think both of these initiatives do have some merit and some really interesting aspects of them, but they are distinct visions of the regionalism and the direction of regionalization going forward. I'd like to talk about some of the opportunities and challenges of both initiatives, and what I call possible crosswalks between the initiatives. And what this addresses is what Jeff mentioned in his introduction. Is there a place for countries to cooperate in the United States, Japan, and China? Or is there places where other countries can insert themselves in both of these initiatives? And my simple answer is it's not a Belt Road Initiative or a free and open Indo-Pacific. Rather, you can choose both. And then lastly, I'm going to end with this idea that I think these two visions really are a two-track regionalism. They're moving how regionalism is focused over the past 20 or 40 years from a north-south, Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia integrating to two parallel forms of regionalism. One that's focused on through Beijing, and the second one that's focused on the littoral states of the Indo-Pacific. So when we're thinking about this, I think it's really easy for us to understand why this region is so important and why many countries are considering crafting an Indo-Pacific strategy or vision. If you take a look on the right side of this slide, the world's population, 61% of the world's population is within the region. That means 61% of the consumers. 7 of the top 15 US trading partners are within this region. It's home to at least 50 out of 30 of the world's megacities, and that's increasing really year by year. And lastly, the US has at least 5 security partnerships within the region. And those security partnerships have provided a broad security architecture for the region. That security architecture has really allowed countries to prosper, to build their economies, and to really develop peacefully over the past 70 years. And I think that's really, really critical. At the same time, we have places like the South China Sea and the East China Sea, which are really cauldrons for tensions and perhaps instability. And these areas are really a challenge for rules-based order, and they're a challenge for understanding how the region is going to develop. In particular, are states going to abide by international law in terms and the decisions of international institutions such as the Permanent Court of Arbitrations. And at this particular stage, we have many questions about this. Some other important aspects which really drive home the message that I think this is a critical region. It's home to at least 38 countries, 44% of the world's surface, 65% of the population, critically 62% of the world's GDP, 46% of the world's merchandise trade, and it goes on and on and on. 50 years ago, what happened in Europe and the United States would reverberate throughout the world. But now what happens in the Indo-Pacific region is going to touch all parts of the world. And it means that we need to start crafting policies that are focused on this particular region. Now, when we look at the free and open Indo-Pacific, the free and open Indo-Pacific vision in the case of Japan, or the Indo-Pacific strategy in the case of the United States, and these should not be conflated. They're different, but there are significant overlaps. They are important because they do link the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. They link the big North American economies to the East Asian economies to the burgeoning or the emerging economies in Southeast Asia and India. And this is critical because this is where economic development is going to be driven in the next century. Now, the Japanese have put forward a so-called free and Indo-Pacific strategy. I'm not going to drill down into this because I don't think it's so important to look at this PowerPoint, but you can see that if you did a little Google online, you'd find that actually the official documents that that the Japanese government has put out on the free and open Indo-Pacific aren't that detailed. It's very broad, but some of the key take-homes that I think that we can take home from their vision is it focuses on inclusivity. It focuses on infrastructure and connectivity, and this includes a digital economy. It focuses on trade. It focuses on promoting a rules-based order, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, in particular in the digital, maritime, space, and trade domains. And of course, it focuses on maritime security. Now, this is where we can think about some of the convergences of interests of many countries when they're thinking about the Indo-Pacific. And I've listed some countries up there: Japan, Australia, India, the United States, Canada, and the EU in terms of a region. But we can see that they have a lot of shared concerns in the Indo-Pacific and converging interests. So growing interdependence with China, and what are some of the consequences with that? And I think we've seen that this week with the Chinese government putting a 200% sales tariff on Australian wine. Economic coercion is a growing concern of many countries within the region. There's concerns about Chinese surrogates in Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia in terms of nuclear development. And of course, that's the actors are North Korea and Pakistan. I think there's growing concern about how the United Nations and its United Nations Security Council can't seem to evolve to include other members, in particular Japan, India, perhaps an African state. And that's very much related to countries in the Security Council abstaining from any kind of change. Importantly, I think China's expanding maritime claims in the East China Sea, South China Sea, and the Indian Ocean are really a concern for many countries within the region, particularly focusing on what is the consequences for sea lanes of communication. In terms of international institutions and regional institutions, there's growing concerns of what's happening to institutions and associations like ASEAN. No longer they can function in terms of their consensus-based decision-making processes without being fractured, what I say fractured by outside countries. And this is a challenge for ASEAN centrality, and it's a challenge for how the region is going to develop. And ASEAN centrality has been a core principle for regional integration over the past 30 years. And if it loses its ability to function cohesively, this is going to challenge how we think about regionalism within the region. Most recently, I think growing convergences are along the idea of resilience in global supply chains. And in the COVID-19 pandemic period, we had a huge disruption in global supply chains. And this is really something that I think many countries in the Indo-Pacific are thinking about very seriously. And most recently, the Japanese government, along with India and Australia, have agreed to what they call resilient supply chain initiative, where they start to build alternative supply chains to build resilience into the system. And then lastly, I think an area of huge convergence for many countries is this idea of infrastructure connectivity. So really focusing on development and integration. And here the idea is that the more integrated the region is based on good infrastructure connectivity, is that they can self-strengthen their economies, they can improve their intra-regional integration. And by doing that, that strengthens their ability to have strategic autonomy vis-a-vis extra-regional players or inter-regional players. Now, that being said, there's many diverging interests when we think about the Indo-Pacific region amongst these major countries. Issue linkage, again, for example, India is not willing to support Japan and other Northeast Asian countries' concerns about nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. There's also different views about alliances and minilaterals. Again, India is not comfortable with these ideas of minilaterals and alliance politics. And as a result, it makes it difficult to institutionalize some institutions. And at this particular stage, I'm thinking about the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. And I think if any of us watched the output of the October visit of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue foreign ministers, we saw that they came away with different takeaways. And I think that's important for us to be thinking about. Other diverging interests, I think, is really competing visions of what the Indo-Pacific is. Here, again, I think that the United States under the Trump administration has had a very different kind of view about the Indo-Pacific and about what the Indo-Pacific vision should be for the United States. And in particular, it had a very hard approach to China and particularly to the Communist Party, where Japan and other countries within this region, they need to focus on inclusivity. Their biggest trading partner is China, and it's quite unreasonable just to cut off that relationship. They also have different geographic understandings of the region. So, for example, India has a very clear view that their free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific vision really focuses on the Indian Ocean and not much into the Pacific. And then lastly, I think there's diverging interests in terms of the securitization of the Quad and the free and open Indo-Pacific concept or vision. And here, again, going back to the October discussions in Tokyo between the Quad members, they do have very different visions about how the Indo-Pacific vision should evolve. But let's think about some of the tools that we can teed out of the Indo-Pacific strategy. I think one of the major tools is investment in infrastructure connectivity. And what we've seen is multilateral cooperation between the United States, Australia, and Japan in terms of financing infrastructure, and that's going to continue. That financing of infrastructure and trying to get private industry into connectivity and infrastructure building in the Indo-Pacific is really supposed to compete upfront with the BRI initiatives within the region. And we can come back to that, whether it's effective or not. But I think that the clear message here through Indo-Pacific visions within this region is that infrastructure connectivity should be focused on being fiscally sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and of course transparent. And by using private investment, at least these three countries feel that in part that is a way to secure those initiatives. Another important area that I think that is not discussed enough about Indo-Pacific vision, in particular from Japan's point of view, is the real focus on infrastructure and connectivity. And this is a map of the region of all the different infrastructure projects that are occurring through and under this FOIP umbrella. And you can see that there's the East-West corridor here in Southeast Asia, the Southern Economic Corridor in Southeast Asia from Northern Vietnam to Southern Vietnam. We also have connectivity projects in Myanmar, in South Asia, as well as South Asia. And just you can see a little bit better on this particular graph, but really these infrastructure projects that are being deployed under FOIP umbrellas are about promoting intra-ASEAN economic synergy. The view here is that Japan and other partners that are deploying infrastructure connectivity projects within South Asia and Southeast Asia, that they can foster more intra-regional integration, and that intra-regional integration will bolster economic dynamism, and that bolstering of economic dynamism will help with capacity building and really give them some more strategic autonomy in how they manage their relations, not only with China, but with other extra-regional partners. On the security front, the quadrilateral security dialogue is slowly gaining some momentum. And I say slowly gaining momentum because I think that the main members of the quadrilateral security dialogue are really looking at the region still from different points of view. And I've put down the Japan, India, Australia, and the EU here just for comparative points of view. And I didn't include the United States because I think the United States position is probably the most securitized compared to the other countries on this list. But you look at Japan's in trying to deal with some of the security challenges in the region through a FOIP framework, is using the quadrilateral dialogue to talk about energy access concerns, territorial disputes, and really this is seen through the economic expansion in light of Sino-Japanese rivalry. India, on the other hand, is looking at the quadrilateral security dialogue in terms of its backyard, the Indian Ocean, viewing port development and infrastructure development of China in and around India's backyard as really stepping into India's traditional spheres of influence. And they would like the quadrilateral security dialogue to deal with some of these issues indirectly, and I think through diplomacy. Australia, on the other hand, is also concerned about South China Sea assertiveness within the region. But really, if you take a look at its July revised national security strategy that was put out by their Ministry of Defense, what we see is that they've slightly shifted their view of the Indo-Pacific, and they would like to focus a regional focus, in particular on the Pacific Islands and their northern domain around Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, and some aspects of the South China Sea and East China Sea. And here, again, we see Australia engaging in this kind of regional focus to deal with security needs through the quadrilateral security dialogue, but also bilaterally, when we see 2 weeks ago, Australia and Japan put forth a defense treaty or a defense pact to enhance their cooperation. The EU, on the other hand, is quite interesting. We see some members developing their Indo-Pacific visions, and those Indo-Pacific visions are also inclusive, and they also worry, and they state very openly that they have concerns about China, but at the same time, they don't want to over-securitize their engagement within the region. So what are some of the challenges in terms of the free and open Indo-Pacific? I think one of the important areas is sustainability. Is this financially sustainable? And I think in the post-COVID area, this is an even more critical question, because many economies are going to be pulling themselves out of recession. And how much can they, how many resources can they provide to the region is a really, really interesting question. ASEAN balancing neighbors. The question here is for ASEAN countries, how much do they resonate with whether it's the free and open Indo-Pacific vision of Japan or the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States or other countries? Here we see ASEAN hedging their bets, and they put forth their own Indo-Pacific outlook, which really reaffirmed ASEAN's centrality and reaffirmed this idea of not taking sides. When we see the free and open Indo-Pacific, I think another challenge really is its low scale of investment compared to China's BRI. And this is really, really critical. And I'll show you some figures in a few minutes when we're looking at the BRI. The speed of programs as well. FOIP programs seem to be slower compared to the Chinese model. And this is not praising the model. I think it's a factor of the more rigid guidelines for infrastructure connectivity projects, focusing on fiscal sustainability, environmental sustainability, as well as other higher standards. And lastly, I think in terms of thinking about how FOIP is going to evolve in the region, it's really this idea of buy-in. Can an over-securitized approach to looking at free and open Indo-Pacific get buy-in from regional players? And this is a really open question. And I think countries like Indonesia, countries like Malaysia, Cambodia, Laos, and even India, they are very reticent to have an overtly anti-Chinese free and open Indo-Pacific vision or strategy. And as a result, they do sit on the fence in terms of many of these different kinds of programs. And we'll come back to this in a few minutes. What about the BRI? Now, the BRI really is China's largest economic footprint in South and Southeast Asia. It's built on this premise of win-win, that China is trying to enhance economic development of countries so that they can help develop, but by exporting its overcapacity, China can also deal with some of its internal contradictions in terms of its economy. And for China, really, the Belt Road Initiative is really about this decreasing its dependence on the South China Sea and East China Sea for resources, and it deepens its dependence with other countries. And I'm going to come to this in a second. So in my interviews in Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou and Nanjing with Chinese scholars, it's quite interesting to themselves how they understand the Belt Road Initiative. Some are looking at the Belt Road Initiative in terms of what they call new developmentalism, that this is a tool to help other emerging countries develop their economies, build infrastructure, connectivity, and this will open up their economies to new markets, to new trading opportunities. And they view this new developmentalism of the BRI really through the lens of China's experience over the past 40 years. It was through infrastructure and connectivity development that helped China develop its economy, open its economy, and really create the circumstances for its growth over the past 40 years. Other scholars talk about geoeconomics, this idea that China is really trying to build economic interdependence and dependency with surrounding countries, in that China will be each country's biggest trading partner. And that's already a fact today. And the consequences of being China's biggest trading partner, of your country having China as your biggest trading partner, means that you're much more dependent on the Chinese economy than they are on you. And from many Chinese scholars' points of view, this creates a dependency that helps deal with some of China's security challenges with its neighbors. And again, we've seen this with Australia, with South Korea, with Japan, with Taiwan and other countries in terms of economic coercion over the past few years. Other scholars have talked about this in terms of what we call economic autonomy, and they view the Belt Road Initiative in many ways as trying to recreate the American economic autonomy that it enjoys. So America has great neighbors, of course, Canada and Mexico, no security challenges. Most of its trade is in North America, and it doesn't have any security challenges on the Atlantic and the Pacific side. So these scholars view the Belt Road Initiative as a way to reorient the Chinese economy so that it creates a dependency with surrounding countries so that it can export and import energy resources, imports and exports through Belt Road Initiative countries, which really decrease some of the security challenges that China faces in the East China Sea and the South China Sea and the Malacca Straits. So that goes to that last point of security. Lastly, I think many of scholars talk about China's own grand strategy, that the Belt Road Initiative is really about bringing Chinese public goods to the world, creating interdependency with other countries around the world through building interdependency that you can decrease the chance for conflict. And this will allow China to build new rules, shape their environment, and create new standards and regulations that favor China in a way that, for many of them, they feel that the current system doesn't. So there's a lot of views in China about the Belt Road Initiative. And again, looking at the kinds of money that is involved in the Belt Road Initiative is absolutely amazing. So up to 2016, about 1.4 trillion US dollars. And it's estimated at least another $4 trillion for all projects in 2017. And I think that this really speaks to the need of infrastructure and connectivity within the region, and China's ability to put forward that infrastructure. I'm going to skip this because I think you can. I can put this PowerPoint up for you afterwards. But the key take homes for you to understand from the BRI is really this idea of the five principles of peaceful coexistence. So China insists that the BRI is going to be based on this idea of non-interference and protection of sovereignty. And I think this is really, really critical. The idea that you have mutual respect for each other, that you develop on a win-win basis, and lastly, that you don't try to shape each other's future. Now, why this is important, again, I think it focuses on sovereignty, it focuses on non-interference, and these are really critical areas to understand how China is trying to shape the region in a way through principles that protect its bottom line. China does not want to be part of international institutions that can shape how governing occurs domestically. Xi himself has talked about the BRI in terms of globalization. He's talked about it in terms of that everybody should be together working to promote globalization, and that closing off your economy is not something that can really bring benefits to other countries. And again, he gave this speech at the Davos Forum in 2017 when there was a change in power in Washington, to directly contrast with some of the rhetoric that was coming out of Washington at that time. We see other rhetoric on China's understanding of the Belt Road Initiative, or at least how it's selling it, in terms of really not trying to create spheres of influence. And really, you see this process of trying to sell the Belt Road Initiative in direct contrast to how China understands Western countries in terms of how they've engaged in development. And that's development through trying to change, to enhance governance, to promote rule of law, to promote countries to increase their standards of how they govern themselves. And I think this is one of the core areas of difference between the BRI and the free and open Indo-Pacific, is this ideas of really not trying to shape other countries and how they're evolving. When we look at and we drill down into this, I think that the key take home for all of you is down here at the bottom of this slide, is that the Belt Road Initiative is meant to enhance trade and investment. It's meant to build a free trade network, and these are designed to promote growth and in both the region and globally. So a strong focus on building infrastructure and trade routes, and that this is meant to promote growth, and through promoting growth that you can enhance the level of integration and interdependency of China with receiving countries. So I think some of the key take homes that you can take are from the recent 19th Party Congress, where China really focused on this idea of really stressing that China is trying to further links eastward and westward and across land and sea. And what we see in the Belt Road Initiative is generally 5 land corridors and 1 sea corridor. The idea of focusing on achieving policy, infrastructure, trade, financial, and people-to connectivity. So really this comprehensive engagement with countries along the route in a non-binding manner, right? Again, protecting sovereignty and protecting protecting that idea of non-interference. So where are the opportunities and challenges here? I think that really one of the biggest challenges along the BRI is the consequences of creating economic dependent relationships. There's a danger of having too many eggs in one basket, and I think many scholars, when they're looking into BRI relationships with China, are seeing these kind of dependent relationship happening with the beneficiaries of BRI aid, and that means that it becomes more difficult to have your own political decisions, especially when they go against the decisions in Beijing. In some cases, I think there's growing uncertainty about feasibility in terms of these projects. And if you look where the BRI projects, they're often going through ethnic and religious conflicted areas. And you take a look at Pakistan, you take a look at some of the South Central Asian countries, these areas are really seen as highly prone to ethnic conflict. And the idea of bringing in the Chinese model, Chinese workers and Chinese infrastructure to build infrastructures in these areas and not cause ethnic tension or religious conflict is really creating challenges. And we've already seen evidence that this is becoming difficult in countries like Pakistan. Another key area, I think, is this idea of what happens if there's a financial crisis in the region. And I think we've already seen that with the COVID-19 pandemic, is that the model just doesn't work when borders are closed. China can no longer export their labor, their overcapacity, and that means those projects stop until borders open up again. So this is a health pandemic. What happens if there's a financial crisis? Will China be able to continue to finance its BR-related failures? Lastly, I think debt traps and neocolonialism are some other concerns about the BRI. I think that the debt trap itself is somewhat overblown, and I think that when you drill down into some of the examples of the debt trap, there's only one case that really comes to mind, and if you again, have a granular look. The Sri Lankans are just as responsible for the financial misstep as the Chinese taking advantage of it. So I guess some of the key take homes that I'd like you to think about when you're comparing these two initiatives, first has to do with what we call regional order. Japan and US FOIP ideas really focus on multipolarity with US leadership and a coalition of the willing. On the Chinese side, really, China is really trying to push this idea of a new type of great power relations with China and other countries. And this new type of great power relations is trying to forge what they call win-win relationships. And that does sound really good. The challenge is that when you're trying to form bilateral relations, there's really only one country that is as powerful or more powerful than China at this particular moment, and that's the United States. So your bargaining power does decrease significantly. In terms of values, we see the free and open Indo-Pacific being quite inclusive. And what I mean by that, it it can include all countries. And we see that the Indian, the Japanese, and even aspects of the US Indo-Pacific strategy are meant to be inclusive if countries follow a rules-based approach. On the China side, really, it's exclusive. It's not interventionist to core interests. And I think that is a particularly distinguishing feature. Its agreements are non-binding, which means that the contracts can be broken. The FOIP is based on rule of law. BRI is based on non-intervention. I think the structure of the FOIP is really hierarchical. It's US-led, and it's horizontal in terms of a rules-based order, where I think most evidence suggests that the BRI is hierarchical for China, despite China not making that case. In terms of Asia policy itself and formulating Asia policy, really, FOIP is trying to create autonomous rules-based and good governance development. And we see that in most of the documents associated with FOIP, where I think the BRI is creating economic reliance on China, and that economic reliance will have consequences. And I encourage you to think about the recent track record of economic coercion. Just out of time considerations, I'm going to talk very briefly about potential crosswalks between these two initiatives. And here I think that Japan and China have already talked about infrastructure cooperation in third countries. There was some initiatives in Thailand that did go on, and I think that they've stopped in the wake of the COVID crisis. But this is an area where I think there is potential opportunities for cooperation between Japan, China, and the United States and other countries in terms of infrastructure cooperation in third countries. Healthcare is another area that I think, in particular, COVID-19 related healthcare is another area that I think there's going to open up in terms of crosswalks, in terms of cooperation between the BRI and FOIP related initiatives. And here I think the new, the incoming president in the United States will probably take a somewhat different tact here in terms of trying to find opportunities to cooperate on the COVID era. And I think we saw this just this week with Foreign Minister Wang Yi from China talking to Prime Minister Suga, and Foreign Minister Motegi talking about the opportunities for cooperation in healthcare. In terms of non-traditional security, here's another area that I think there's opportunities for cooperation in terms of piracy, illegal fishing, and climate change. And lastly, trade. I think that the recent signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnerships demonstrates that in terms of countries in this region, they don't have a zero-sum approach to dealing with other countries within the region, and they want to continue to promote trade as well as security with other partners. So lastly, I think that the take-home message for all of you is that I think the BRI really is a continental project. It's a continental form of regionalization versus maritime regionalization. The BRI really will continue to cement connections through infrastructure connectivity, primarily with land-based countries west of China and south of China, with some limitations. It will fracture ASEAN centrality and create challenges for ASEAN to function moving forward. Its form of regionalization will continue to be hierarchical, and it will and that hierarchical form of relations will be based on economic asymmetries. The FOIP initiative or vision or strategy really, I think, is a regionalization process that's focusing on the littoral states or the maritime environment, and really would place China at the periphery of this maritime environment, but not necessarily exclude it from that maritime environment. We're going to see Japan and India play larger roles in the regionalization process, but also Southeast Asia, taking advantage of their maritime locations. And again, I think that the COVID-19 is going to accelerate this process with the understanding that supply chains need to be diversified. The global supply chains need to be recalibrated, not to decouple from China, but to create some resilience in supply chains so that we don't have another breakdown in global supply chains trade that we saw in the COVID-19 era. And I'll stop there. Thank you, everyone.